When a company misses its numbers, the analysts are looking at the market's looking at the analysts, the investors look at the strategy, and boards are looking at the CEO, and almost nobody looks at the talent system. That's a measurement failure, and it's one of the most expensive blind spots in enterprise performance. Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today we're going to talk about shareholder value and why it is, underneath all of the analysis and all the postmortems, a talent problem. Because here's what most earnings call postmortems get wrong. They diagnose the output without examining the constraint. The market was soft, the strategy was missed, the execution stalled, but execution is not just a natural force of nature. It is a product of people in roles with a capability, clarity, and mandate to do the work. And when execution fails, the question is not what went wrong in the market. The question is, where in the talent system did the constraint live? And why did nobody see it before it showed up in the numbers? If you have ever watched a well-capitalized company with a credible strategy fail to hit its plan for 2 or 3 consecutive quarters, and the postmortem never once named a talent gap as a root cause, this episode is going to name the mechanism. This episode is going to give you a cleaner diagnostic lens for performance conversations at the top of your organization. But before we get started, let me ask you for a quick favor. If you find value in these conversations, I really hope you do. Please like and subscribe or follow the Talent Sherpa podcast wherever you get your shows. When you like the podcast, it helps more senior leaders find the show and allows us to keep doing this work for the larger HR community. And this week, I also want to tell you about the CHRO Asset Academy. We're taking applications now. If you're a sitting CHRO or you're preparing to step into the role, this is a cohort-based program built for that very transition. We go deep on mandate clarity, altitude, and how to operate with genuine enterprise scope and mandate. Everything you need is at mytalentsherpa.com. All right, let's get into it. Let me walk you through a scenario you have almost certainly seen, even if you didn't name it this way at the time. The company has a very strong plan, great strategy. The investment thesis is sound. The board aligned. The CEO has communicated the direction clearly and with conviction. And then the year plays out and the results fall short. Not because the strategy was bad or wrong, not because the market collapsed or there were too many headwinds, but because the commercial leadership team was not built for the growth target that they were chasing. Now, the head of sales had been excellent at defending and optimizing a mature book of business. She had been in that role for almost 6 years, and the company was now asking her to lead a land and expand motion into a new segment she'd never operated inside. Nobody named that gap explicitly. Nobody said, the capability this role requires for the next 18 months does not match the capability that we currently have. So the gap ran invisible, and the miss surfaced in quarter 4 when it was too late to course correct. That's one version of the pattern. A private equity-backed business acquires a platform company. The thesis depends on aggressive add-on integration over 3 years. The operations leader who will run the integration has done it once before at a smaller scale, maybe a decade ago. The PE sponsor sees a strong operator with a credible track record. What nobody is seeing is that this leader has never moved at this pace or at this complexity. The first integration goes over budget and behind schedule, and the board attributes it to deal complexity. The talent constraint remains unnamed. Or take the organization that makes a correct strategy bet on a new solution category. They find the initiative, they fund it, they build the product, and then they discover that none of their senior commercial leaders know how to position it or sell it. The product's ready. The talent system is not. And the opportunity window narrows while they're still trying to train their way out of a hiring gap. In every one of these cases, the talent system was the constraint. And in every case, that constraint was invisible until the business felt it in revenue, margin, or competitive position. Nobody had translated that strategy into a talent requirement with enough specificity to see the gap before it became a result. That's the state of play. And it's a more common one than any board presentation will ever acknowledge. Now, there are three structural traps that keep talent constraints invisible until it's too late. First trap is treating talent in a talent review as a backwards looking process. We all do it. Most organizations review talent based on past performance. How did this leader do last year? Did they hit their plan? Were they well regarded by their peers? These are not useless questions. They're just not helpful when the business is about ready to go through something it's never gone through before. Past performance tells you about the environment that already existed. It tells you very little about the context the new leader is going to be playing in and whether that leader is even equipped for the environment that's coming. When organizations skip the forward-facing talent diagnostic, they end up flying with instruments calibrated for the last flight, not the next one. Now, the second trap is confusing tenure with readiness. I know you say we don't do that, but seniority and capability are not the same thing, but we treat it that way sometimes. A leader who has been in a role for 4 years has not necessarily developed the capability for the next phase. But organizations often treat longevity as a proxy for readiness because it's comfortable and it's easier, and because replacing someone who has been successful carries real political weight. So here's the trap. It's keeping the wrong person in a pivotal role during a growth window, because I think that carries far more risk than the transition cost of reallocating and upgrading the talent. The real exposure is not in the short-term disruption of a role change. It's the sustained underperformance of a role that is 3 years overdue for an upgrade. Now, the third trap is the hardest one to name. It's when the CHRO is managing HR programs instead of managing enterprise risk. That's us. And in most cases, this tracks back to a mandate failure. The CHRO was never explicitly asked to translate strategy into talent requirements. Nobody asked them to map capability gaps against an operating plan before the year started. Nobody gave them the room to say, this leadership configuration is not built for what you're about ready to attempt. So they run the talent cycle. They manage the programs. The constraint runs invisible until the business surfaces it in the numbers. So here's a frame shift that changes how this works. Talent constraints are enterprise risks. They belong in the same planning conversations as capital structure risk, technology risk, and market positioning risks. When you see them that way, the CHRO's job, it pivots, it changes completely. The question is no longer, do we have good people? Do we have roles open? The question becomes, does the capability profile of this organization match the execution requirements of the strategy over the next 18 months? Where are the gaps? How material are they? What does it cost in speed margin to leave them unresolved? Now, that's what it means to operate at enterprise altitude. A CHRO I worked with made the shift in a very specific moment. She walked into her CEO's annual strategy review and said, hey, I've mapped out the top 12 pivotal roles against what the strategy actually demands in the next 18 months. And in 4 of those roles, there is a meaningful gap between what the role requires and what the current incumbent can deliver. Now, she framed that as a risk to the operating plan, not a succession issue. And the CEO stopped writing on his notepad for a moment and asked her to walk him through each one of the gaps. That conversation all by itself changed her mandate. It changed the questions the CEO asked her in the subsequent months. It changed the rooms that she was invited into. And the reframe works because it changes the altitude of the conversation. Talent as a program lives in an HR update back of the slides. Talent as a risk variable lives in the strategy review front of the slides. And the CHRO who can operate in the second conversation has enterprise influence. The CHRO who stays in the first one manages programs that never touch the decisions that matter most. So I think there are 4 plays that move this from concept to practice. Play number 1 is you got to translate the operating plan into a capability demand profile. Take the top 5 or 6 strategic priorities for the next 18 months and ask about each one of them. What does the leader accountable for this outcome need to be able to do that they're not doing today? And then write that down in behavioral terms. Be specific enough that you could use the answer to write an outcome-oriented job description. This exercise creates a forward-looking demand profile that you can run against your current leadership inventory. It moves your talent review from a performance look back to risk identification. And those are two very different conversations, and they produce two very different outcomes. Play number 2 is name the pivotal roles explicitly. Not every role carries the same strategic weight. 2 or 3 roles in most organizations are probably going to determine whether the operating plan executes. Identify them by name. Then ask, if the leader in this role delivers 30% below expectation, what's the downstream consequence to our plan? That series of questions, they surface the talent risk, I think, faster than any 9-box exercise will. They're solving for different things because it forces the business to take on the ownership risk, not just the CHRO. Now, play 3 is to build a constraint map before the year starts. A constraint map is a clean, readable artifact. It shows each pivotal role, the capability it requires, and outcomes for the coming year, an honest assessment of the current leader's readiness for that specific requirement, and the gap. It is a risk instrument. The CEO reads it in the same way they read a capital allocation memo. Present it in your Q4 planning cycle along with the operating plan. When the CEO and CFO see the HR work in that context, the conversation, I guarantee, will change. You're no longer reporting on talent. You are managing an enterprise variable. And play 4 is to change the language you bring into the strategy conversation completely, because language is going to signal altitude. If you're presenting talent topics to a CEO or board, how you frame them determines who listens and what happens next. Drop the development framing. Replace it with risk framing. Capability gap, execution risk, business cost, timeline. Say, we have a capability gap in this role that creates execution risk on this initiative, and here's what we think it will cost if we don't close it before Q2. That language belongs in the strategy review, and it changes the room you're in, and it changes the nature of your mandate. Now, I realize I just asked you to reframe your entire talent operating model as a risk management function. If your current annual talent review cycle was not built for that, you are in very good company. Don't worry about it. Most were not. But that is also the opportunity. And if there's one thing I want you to carry out of this episode, it's this. Until the CHRO is translating business strategy into talent risk with the same specificity that finance translate strategy into capital risk, the most expensive constraints in the organization will stay invisible until they show up in the numbers. So thank you for spending some time with me today. I so appreciate you being a part of this community of senior leaders who want to rethink how human capital really works. A shout out this week to David from Austin, Texas. And thank you for listening, whether you are tuning in from Denver or Dublin. This community keeps growing, and that is because of you. Now, if you're thinking about how to apply this in your own situation, let me point you to a couple of resources. If role clarity is where you want to start, and it usually is, check out getpropulsion.ai. They have a set of AI teammates that can help enable your leadership to focus on the work that actually drives business outcomes. And please note, what we talked about today requires that level of clarity. And if you're a first-time CHRO or you're preparing to step into the role, I'd love to work with you. We build practical tools to help you make an impact from day one. You can find everything at mytalentsherpa.com. And don't forget to check out my best-selling Substack at talentsherpa.substack.com. So until next time, keep raising the bar. Keep connecting talent to strategy. And keep on climbing.